Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our fifth, I believe, and final pre-conference webinar leading into the 2025 CFI Mobilize the Movement conference in August. We are thrilled to have you here. I'm going a little bit of business just to get us started. If you are requesting nursing home administrator CEs, be sure that at the end of the conference, at the end of the webinar, when Janet posts the link to the survey, that you click on that. I believe it will also pop up when you close out of the survey, but be sure to fill that out, and then we will get you your CEs within the next couple of days. And I think that's really about all the business. We will be using the chat, so feel free to pop a note in the chat, a comment at any point. We'll also be following the Q&A, so if there's a question that you have, you can put it in there, and we'll be sure before the end of our time together that we share those with Paul. And that being said, it's time to introduce Paul to you. I am so excited about today's webinar and today's speaker. I apologize because I was expecting the slide to be up on the screen with the title of the webinar, and it's not there. So, and I don't remember the full title, but I can tell you that you are going to learn so much about the value of volunteers, about companion volunteers, about how to create and grow a program within your organization. I think it's something we all know and believe that how important they are. I have the privilege of knowing Paul for probably about 10 years now. He worked with us at Pioneer Network for quite some time, wrote a wonderful book on companion volunteers, and is the founder, and I have the privilege of being part of the founding board as well of the National Association of Long-Term Care Volunteers. So really working hard to find ways to help support communities and anyone supporting elders in creating relationships and companionship that's a win-win for everybody. So that's enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and I know you're going to really enjoy your time together with him.
Well, Joan, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can see my screen. And anyway, I'm just thrilled to death to be able to do this. And I've been at this now for many years, and I've had personal experience as a volunteer, as well as managing volunteers over the years. And the results that I've seen and the relationships that have been formed over the years between volunteers and residents is just remarkable. And I'm sure some of you probably have stories to share as well.
Let
Um,
me interrupt, Paul, to say your display is showing in the notes view versus the presentation view. You might want to
oh,
change your display settings there.
well, let's see here. I thought I hit screen two. Let's try that.
Okay. I
Is
know
that
you did
better?
it correct when we practiced.
Is that better?
That's perfect.
All
Thank
right. Oh, well. So I got a C minus on that one. Okay. So anyway, today then I'm going to share some of my experiences and also uh, really, I think, give some good insight into how to create effective volunteers and also really look at what's happening in our life care, life planning communities, our CCRCs, and how we can mobilize a volunteer movement to transform that environment, not just by adding extra hands, but by cultivating what I call authentic relationships that restore connection, dignity, joy to the people that are living in care communities. And so this presentation then is really grounded in a simple but often overlooked truth. Loneliness is not inevitable in long-term care. With the right approach, volunteers, especially older adults themselves, can play a vital role in shaping a more compassionate and person-centered culture. So, one of the biggest challenges in long-term care today is loneliness and social isolation. Many people living in nursing homes and assisted living communities go days, maybe even weeks without a meaningful personal interaction. And over the years, as I have talked with people working in long-term care, I would ask, what do people really need? And almost unanimously, they would say one-on-one visits. And so that's why I've created this organization to really push that idea of companion volunteers. And so we've made great strides in areas like clinical care, but the emotional and relational needs of those living in communities often go unmet. So what's surprising is that the solution doesn't have to be complicated or costly. Volunteers, just ordinary people with compassion and time, can dramatically reduce isolation and restore a sense of community and connection. And so this session is about recognizing and harnessing that power. So we'll look at how a structured, intentional volunteer movement, especially one that engages older adults themselves, can create authentic relationships that make a lasting impact. Because when someone feels seen and heard and valued, it changes everything. So one of the most important things we can do in this session is to move from ideas to implementation. And so we've structured the around 3 core learning objectives. And first, we'll look at the real world impact that companion volunteers, especially older adults that are living in CCRCs or life planning communities, can have on the well-being of people living in long-term care communities. And then next, we'll walk through the strategies for recruiting, training, and sustaining these volunteers in ways that are practical and aligned with person-directed care. And then finally, we'll work toward action. How can you begin integrating and sustaining a volunteer program in your own community or organization? So whether you're starting from scratch or refining an existing program, you'll come away with tools to move forward. So when we think about improving long-term care, we often focus on staffing, funding, regulation, but there's another powerful force, and that's community engagement, volunteers. Companion volunteers reduce loneliness, they ease the anxiety of that, and create these moments of joy and connectivity. So volunteers have the ability to form deep, authentic relationships with the people they visit. These connections go beyond tasks and checklists. They're about being present, sharing stories, and simply caring. And I have multiple stories over the years of how these relationships changed not only the person that was being visited, but the volunteer themselves and the impact that they had on the staff. And with those volunteers then come from within your community, the continuing care retirement community, the CCRC, they bring something especially valuable, and that is shared experience, common history. They've navigated aging themselves, and they understand it in a personal way from the inside out. Their empathy is rooted in lived experience, and that's what makes the connection feel real, not transactional. That's the power of peer-based volunteerism. Now, I want to be clear. Intergenerational visits are incredibly valuable because they help bridge age gaps, they break down stereotypes, and they bring joy to younger and older people. But emerging research suggests that peer-to-peer connections between older adults themselves may have a stronger effect on reducing loneliness and depression. These shared life experiences can lead to deeper, more intimate trust and comfort. That said, we also have to recognize a very human challenge, and that is for some older adults, especially those living independently in a CCRC, volunteering in a skilled nursing setting can feel intimidating. It can bring up fears about their own future. You know, what if I end up over here? What if I end up here someday? Well, that's understandable. And that's why we must approach those volunteers with care, empathy, and support, helping them process those feelings while also seeing the incredible difference they can make when they move past the fear what often emerges is a deep sense of purpose and connection that benefits everyone. So it's not either or. Both approaches matter, but peer companionship is something that we might not have fully tapped into yet. And that's what we're here to change. So we've been talking about volunteers in general, but I want to spotlight a group with enormous untapped potential. And that is, again, older adults living independently in a continuing care retirement setting. So these are people who have time and energy, they have life experiences, and many now are looking for meaningful ways to contribute. And most importantly, they deeply understand the experience of aging. And that's what makes them such a powerful peer companion. So by engaging residents from independent or assisted living areas, we can create peer-to-peer relationships that feel natural and affirming. You know, these aren't just friendly visits, they're moments of shared identity and experiences. The volunteer knows what it's like to have age-related losses, and the person being visited knows that they're not alone in that journey. So at the same time, we're also building intergenerational support when families or students join in. So this isn't about replacing one model with another. It's about layering community in all directions, older adults supporting one another and working alongside younger generations to build a culture of connection. And that's the true power of tapping into CCRCs, not just as care settings, but as engines of purpose, empathy, and community engagement. So our first objective is to recognize the true impact that these companion volunteers have, especially when they come from a shared life stage or environment like a CCRC. And to be clear, we need volunteers of every shape, size, and ability. And so there are people that will come and do activities or lead games and have group projects and things like that. But the companion volunteer, what we're talking about today, is someone that comes in to do one-on-one visits, to learn a person's history, and then maybe go on to create individualized activities with the person that they're spending time with. So we know that loneliness and isolation is more than just an emotional state. There's actually risk factors for serious health problems like depression or cognitive decline and even early mortality. In fact, we know that people that are not getting regular visits in our care communities are twice as likely to die as those that are getting visitors in the same period. So volunteers, particularly those with shared life experience, can help interrupt this trajectory. So when a volunteer is truly present, listens with empathy, and shows up consistently, the relationship that forms is both emotionally supportive and deeply meaningful. It helps restore a sense of identity and connection. In fact, I had one woman say to me, I have a lot of people around me, nurses, aides, and so on, but there's really no one here just for me. But when that volunteer is an older adult, someone who understands aging firsthand, the bond is even stronger. There's often a sense of, hey, you get me, you know what I'm going through. And that kind of peer connection fosters trust more quickly and creates space for emotional openness. So it's not just about having someone to talk to, it's about being seen and understood and valued. And that's the foundation for emotional and even physical well-being. So I just want to pause here, not to report results, but just to think for a moment. Imagine what if every person in skilled nursing or memory care had someone just for them, someone who wasn't there to complete a task, but simply to share a moment, a story, or some quiet time. And what if independent living residents, the people already living in our communities, became the emotional core of connection? Not guests or observers, but engaged companions and community builders. And what if we treated companionship with the same level of planning and purpose as we treat medication administration or meal delivery? So this is the future that we're building toward. And while I don't have hard data or long case studies here, I believe deeply based on lived experience and my own experiences, feedback from the care teams, and then decades of volunteer engagement that the possibilities are transformative. And so this is our invitation to create something new. Our second objective centers on how we bring people in and keep them engaged. And that means building a thoughtful process to recruit, train, and sustain volunteers from independent living. This isn't just about creating a sign-up sheet. It's about creating a culture where volunteering is seen as an opportunity to build purpose, connection, and community. So over the next few slides, we'll walk through what that process can look like in practice, starting with recruitment. A friend of mine years ago, also running a nonprofit, said, you've got to get out of the seats and into the streets. And so when we're talking about recruiting volunteers from independent living, we need to really start with building relationships, not flyers, not sign-up sheets, not social media, but getting out and talking to people in our communities. And that invitation to become a companion volunteer needs to feel meaningful and personal and flexible. So these sessions, these listening sessions that I like to form, small group conversations and talk about what's going on in our skilled nursing or assisted livings and how people might be able to contribute to the lives of the people that are living there. And so these little sessions, these little group sessions, they become a great entry point. And so instead of just pitching a program, you're inviting people to talk about connection, aging, and purpose, and what it means to show up for someone else. And these conversations build trust and they help ease people into the idea of volunteering. So people like to share stories, they respond to stories. So share simple, powerful examples of visits that made a difference. And for me, one of the great stories I have to tell is Bill and Maury. Maury was living in a long-term care community. His family lived hours and hours away. He was the only one in the town from his family, and he was in his room. He was depressed. He wouldn't come out of his room or participate in activities. And we got a call from a family member, and the daughter asked, "Do you have a volunteer that could visit my father?" And so I asked one of our volunteers, Bill, if he would consider visiting Maury. And Bill was already volunteering in a couple of other nursing homes, but Bill, a retired Marine, went to the nursing home to spend some time with Maury. Well, the end of the story, the long, short story is that they were together for 3 years. In fact, Bill stayed with Maury until Maury's passing. And every week they would get together, they would play cards, they would watch sporting games. Maury's spirits were lifted. He came out of his room, he was participating in activities, and his daughter was ecstatic. And Bill was fun. I said, "Bill, how is it going?" And he said, "Well, it's great. I go there, I visit, we have fun, we play cards, and he beats the pants off me every week." And Maury said, "Well, I let him win once in a while." So the idea is that these stories and telling stories to people about these connections inspires them. Gee, I wish I could do that. And then we want to emphasize the idea of peer impact, the peer-to-peer relationship. What makes these volunteers special is that they're peers. This is not a top-down relationship. It's one person connecting with another who knows what it feels like to age, to experience change, to want meaning. That makes these visits feel less clinical and more human. And then we want to make this feel completely natural for someone who might feel nervous about visiting someone in skilled nursing or memory care. We need to name that fear without judgment. One way to ease the discomfort is to say, you don't have to start alone. Maybe we can match you with someone to visit as a pair, or you can try one visit and just see how it feels. Reassurance and options go a long way. And ultimately, this is about inviting people to bring their wisdom, their humor, and their presence to another person who may simply need someone to say, hey, you matter. One person says yes to volunteering, and we can't just hand them a name tag and send them on their way. Whoops. They need preparation. And I'm very hot. If you know me, I'm very, very hot on really having a strong onboarding process so that people walk into a situation feeling prepared and being able to anticipate things that might happen during their visit. And that preparation not only goes to retention, but it also goes to recruiting, because when people come into a training session and they feel like that, wow, I have learned a lot of good information here, then they go back to their friends and say, hey, this is something that you can really invest your time in. It's worthwhile your time. So training is where we really build the foundation for the program. We want to teach our volunteers how to show presence and care, even in silence. Sometimes my volunteers will ask, what should I say? And sometimes there's nothing to say. We just sit and we just be with each other. Of course, we want to be able to make eye contact and have open body language and allowing the conversation to move at the other person's pace. And so we learn about reflective listening, learning to listen and to connect. And then volunteers may hear difficult stories or witness the person's decline. So it's important that they understand their role. They're not there to fix or to carry someone's burdens, but to simply accompany them. So we give them permission to step back, to say no, and to know their limits. And then visiting someone in skilled nursing or memory care can be disorienting for first-time volunteers. And so we want to orient them to what they might see, the equipment, the routines, sounds, and help them navigate interactions in ways that are respectful and comfortable to all. And so we create a space for volunteers to explore their own emotions around aging, illness, or mortality. And this inner work builds empathy, and it helps them show up fully without fear, without projection, and with compassion. And then being culturally competent. This is essential. Volunteers will meet people from different backgrounds, racial, cultural, religious, LGBTQ plus, or otherwise. So cultural competence isn't about knowing everything, but it's about approaching other people with humility, curiosity, and respect. And so we help volunteers practice inclusive language and avoid assumptions and build trust with people whose life stories may very well be very different from their own. And so when we approach training this way, it becomes more than just an orientation. It becomes a transformation, a space where volunteers can begin to understand their presence, offered with care and cultural awareness. And the most important gift they bring is their presence and their time. Once a volunteer is trained and active, your work isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. Sustaining their engagement is where the long-term magic happens. We want volunteers to feel like part of something meaningful and supported. So this requires intention. Volunteers don't expect a parade. They don't want to feel, but they do want to feel appreciated. And so this could be a simple handwritten note, a shout out in a newsletter, or just a special thank you. Personal thank you is actually what research shows is most effective. Personal thank yous from the director. Even an occasional, hey, we noticed how much you brightened someone's day can go a long way. And so we want to offer, flexibility, flexible opportunities and roles. People's energy and capacity, they change over time. So some may want to visit weekly, while others may prefer seasonal projects or group activities. So being flexible, allowing volunteers to engage in a way that fits their lifestyle while still making a difference. But don't underestimate the power of peer support, creating a space like virtual or in person where volunteers can share stories, vent, celebrate, or simply connect can keep them emotionally grounded and mission aligned. And so we bring our volunteers together once a quarter and for a meetup so they can share their stories, share their experiences, talk about some challenges they might face. But what you're doing in those quarterly meetings is creating a sense of community. Hey, there are other people that have the same passion for volunteering that I do, and we've created this circle of volunteers. So regular check-ins matter as well. And so you want to ask your volunteers, how are you doing? Is there anything that you need? Do you feel supported? Volunteers are more likely to stay when they feel heard and seen and part of a larger team and not just sent off into the unknown. And so I always like to get with my veteran volunteers and ask them, how are we doing? Is there anything that we could be doing different? Did you feel prepared through our training for the situations that you're facing, and using that feedback to adjust or improve the program? So in the end, sustaining volunteers, it's really about relationships, the same foundation that we want them to build with the people they visit. So when volunteers feel valued, connected, and cared for, they'll stay committed for the long haul. So when we talk about launching or growing a volunteer program, we often focus on logistics. But the truth is, emotional and cultural barriers are just as important to address, especially when inviting people in independent living to visit those in more advanced care settings. So we want to acknowledge the emotional and resistance and fear. Some potential volunteers hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they're afraid. Visiting someone in skilled nursing or memory care may feel like facing their own future. We need to normalize that. Acknowledge it gently. Hey, it's okay to feel uneasy. You're not alone. And so we want to offer flexible and supported entry points. And so volunteers shouldn't feel like they're being thrown into the deep end. And this goes back to our onboarding process and the training that you offer to those volunteers. No one wants to walk into a situation where they feel unprepared for. So they can shadow a seasoned volunteer. And we've done that. We've had new volunteers pair up with a veteran volunteer and spend some time until that new volunteer feels secure enough to be on their own. We can just start with casual roles like friendly visits during meal times even. So just gradual entry can lower fear and build confidence. And then, of course, we want to be specific about what their role is and what it's not. They're not ombudsmen. They're not coming in to survey. They are companion volunteers. They're coming in to make friends, to learn about someone, and to learn their history, and then to go on to create individualized activities. And volunteers, they might worry that they're expected to handle like a medical issue or say the right thing. So clear role descriptions reassures them that their presence is the gift, not perfection. And so volunteers thrive in communities where staff see them as partners and not intrusions. And the way this is built is by including staff right from the very beginning. And we like to do just a short survey, asking care staff, leadership, everyone involved, all the stakeholders, families, veteran volunteers, what do you think about the volunteer program? What could volunteers be doing for us? What do we think about volunteers? And taking all that input and creating the program from that. And so that when that volunteer shows up on the floor, that nurse or that CNA, the administrator, whoever it might be, they know what that volunteer knows because they've had some input into the onboarding process and the training process and the ongoing management of those volunteers. And so it's very, very important that everyone is involved right from the beginning. And so, I think that volunteers that thrive in communities, then the staff will see them as partners, not us versus them, but us working together to fulfill the mission of our organization. So we want to train staff on how to welcome and support volunteers and how to communicate concerns or ideas. And so when staff are engaged, the volunteers feel valued and they stick around. So if we address those barriers directly with empathy, clarity, and support, we can create a culture where volunteering isn't just accessible, it's irresistible. So we've talked about why this matters. We've talked about how to recruit, how to train. We need to get out into the community and meet with people in person rather than just putting up a poster. We need to get out and talk to people, garner feedback from them, and talk to them about volunteering. And then we need to have a great onboarding process and training process so that that person feels well supported and well prepared for the experience that they're going to have. And then always coming back to the volunteer to find out how they're doing. Are there things that maybe we could improve in the program, and just garnering their feedback. And then finally, just saying a very simple thank you. So anyway, but how do we build our plan, your plan? So we want to start then by defining clear goals and outcomes. Start by identifying what success looks like. Do you want 5 consistent volunteers, a weekly visitor in the memory care, a reduction in resident isolation? So make your goals specific, measurable, and meaningful to your community. And then we want to not create the plan in a silo, as I just mentioned. So we want volunteers will be engaging with staff, residents, and families. So bring leadership and direct care staff right into the planning process, get their input, secure their buy-in, and this will help smooth the way when implementation begins. And then make sure your volunteer activities reflect the community's commitment to the resident choice, respect, and connection. So rather than just assigning tasks, think about relational roles, companionship, conversation partner, or maybe storyteller. The role should fit the person being visited, not just the needs of the calendar. And you don't need a team of 20 people right away. You have 2 or 3 people volunteering at this level, and they will set your place on its ear. And I have had experience with that where we've had 5 or 6 volunteers in a community, maybe of 100 beds or so. And the people managing the volunteers were ecstatic because these people were coming week after week. They were highly committed individuals. And not only were they doing one-on-one visits, but they were also creating individualized activities for the residents, and the staff were just beside themselves. And so we don't need to think about, gee, I need to have 100 volunteers. You get like 5 or 6 people like this or so, it really will make a difference. And then you want to track, how often they visit, what kind of feedback they get, and then how it affects the mood, the behavior, and the well-being of the people that they spend time with. And so there's some great platforms out there like Better Impact, VSIS, Voom, and other. AccuShield now has added a love meter. And so you can collect that data through platforms like that. And so when you're reporting your impact of the volunteer program to your leadership, not only are you going to talk about, we had a wonderful program, music program, and people came and had a nice time. You can also talk about how people's moods were changed. Maybe even talk about people that might be experiencing living with depression. How did that volunteer visit impact that? And so on. And we've gone as far here in NALTCV to really start connecting it with quality measures, use of antipsychotics and hypnotics, fewer falls. We know that in talking with nurses, anecdotally, we know that people that are getting visits, regular visits, have fewer falls. And one study that we did back sometime in 2017 also showed there were fewer reports of severe pain. And this was in line with the studies that Dr. Stephen Treziak are doing at Cooper University in New Jersey, where he's training his doctors to show compassion towards the patients. And when the patients feel that compassion, they're reporting less pain. So this visit not only impacts the person psychologically, but it impacts them physically as well. So, so let your early wins then guide the next steps. So this action plan becomes your foundation, not just for program logistics, but for building a culture that welcomes and celebrates companionship. Let's bring this down to a practical level. If you're wondering, like, what can I actually do next? Then this slide is for you. Here are some four concrete action steps you can take starting today. First of all, we want to build partnerships with independent living residents. So that means getting out into your campus and getting to know the people in your campus. So instead of treating them as passive members, invite them to be co-creators of this community. Reach out through existing whatever councils, resident councils, interest groups, or even personal conversations. And just, again, getting to know the people in your community and talking to them about this idea of creating companion volunteers and garnering feedback from them. And then we want to define clear relational volunteer roles. So not tasks, relationships. The role isn't help with bingo or deliver snacks. Instead, it's be someone to somebody. Be someone's steady companion, or spend time with someone who doesn't get many visitors. And that clarity helps everyone feel more grounded. And then you want to track visits, listen to feedback, and adapt as needed. And so we every so often we put up a survey, and we want to find out how people are feeling about the program. What are the families thinking? What are the veteran volunteers thinking? What about the staff? What about the leadership? And so we're collecting this feedback. And so, we're asking people, how do you think things are going? And so as you gather that information, then you want to adapt your approach as the community evolves. And then finally, you want to just celebrate the small wins and share stories. Did someone make their first visit? Did a new connection form? Did someone laugh who hasn't laughed in a while? These are wins. And so sharing them helps inspire others, and it helps build momentum. And so these steps may seem small, but together they begin to shift your community from passive care to relational engagement, from loneliness to connection, from isolation to belonging. When we talk about volunteerism, it's easy to focus just on the immediate, one visit, one connection, one smile. But the truth is, these moments ripple outward, changing not only the person being visited, but also the volunteer, the staff, the family, and really the whole culture of the care community. So loneliness and isolation aren't just painful, they're harmful. And so regular relational visits have been shown to reduce anxiety, improve mood, and even lead to fewer medical interventions. So that's powerful. So the volunteers uplift staff and family well-being. When volunteers show up consistently, staff feel supported and not replaced. And so I've had feedback from staff. They are so grateful for this person that is spending time with the residents because, frankly, how many call lights, how many call bells are going off because somebody just needs someone to talk to. And so these volunteers take some of the pressure off of the staff. So that nurse said to me once, she goes, I feel so fulfilled when I see my resident engaged in meaningful conversation and activity with one of your volunteers. I know that I can go down the hall and take care of some other business and know that that resident is in good hands. Well, that goes to job satisfaction. And so then for the families, I had a daughter that called me and she said, my father's in a nursing home. None of our family live anywhere around him. Um, there's no one to visit him. He's in his room. He's depressed, and he won't come out for activities. And so Bill, one of our veteran volunteers, I called him. I said, Bill, I said, would you be willing to make an extra visit this week to Maury and just learn what's going on? Well, the short story, the short story is they were together for 3 years. In fact, Bill visited every week for 3 years until Maury's passing. He even attended the funeral. And the daughter was ecstatic because Maury, his spirits were lifted. He was coming out of his room. He was engaging in activities just because once a week, Bill would show up to play cards with him, watch some sporting events, whatever that activity might have been for the week. And so Maury felt once again connected. And so the family is impacted by this. And then the relationships for the volunteers. I had a volunteer once say to me, this has shifted my whole paradigm on life. I talk to my kids a little differently. I hug my wife a little more. And so, and just, I'm a great example of that myself. I had no intention of ever going into gerontology or uh, life, the aging uh, community. That was anywhere on my radar. But after volunteering, it just shifted my whole paradigm. And I thought there's something here that I can really sink my teeth into and work in and really enjoy. And so those kinds of relationships then, um, volunteer then, it not only impacts the volunteer and maybe shifts their way they think about aging, but it might also become a conduit for attracting new workers. And then finally, we're building bridges between care communities and the wider world. And so these people will go back to their friends and neighbors and say, hey, this is something that is really meaningful. This is something that you can really get into, and it's just has tremendous reward to it, and they become your best recruiters. And that's been my experience. My best recruiting is done by our veteran volunteers, more so than social media or signs or any of that. It's word of mouth, and so people coming back and talking about the great experiences they had. So these ripple effects are the true impact of what you're building when you bring volunteers into long-term care. So as we wrap up this session, I just want to leave you with a few key ideas, powerful reminders of why this work matters and where we can go from here. People in independent living are an untapped resource. They're right there. They're in your community, and they may be eager to help, but unsure how. So with invitation, guidance, and support, they can become one of your greatest strengths. And then we know that peer companionship fosters deep, authentic relationships. They have shared historical events. Maybe they've been through wars together and various worldwide events, maybe community events even that they share. Music, going back into the 60s or the 50s and thinking about the music from that time, and so on. And so it really becomes more than just casual conversation, but it becomes this deep relationship, this authentic relationship, a shared moment of understanding and presence. And then we know that volunteers reduce loneliness and they strengthen the care culture. So this it's not just about the person being visited, but it's about the volunteers lifting up the staff, impacting the families, and then the entire emotional climate of a care community. And they really become part of the whole web of care. So with support, even small programs can spark big change. You don't have to start big to make an impact. A few well-prepared volunteers showing up consistently can change lives and inspire others. And, one more story that I think of is I actually had a group of volunteers call a staff meeting. And if you could just imagine that. And the administrator called me several days after that. And he said, "Hey, I just want you to know that your volunteers called a staff meeting." And I thought, oh, that was not part of our training. And I said, "What happened?" And so I was sort of bracing myself. And he said, "Oh, it was great." He said, "I walked into the meeting and I asked them what they wanted. And they said, no, no, we want to know what you need." And they went on to brainstorm ideas and programming. And it was just amazing. I think they even raised several $1,000s for the activities department and so on. So the idea is that the companion volunteers, these people go on really to become uh, integral part of the fabric of your community. So to close then, the message is this very simple. 1 hour, one visit, one heart can create a ripple effect that really will transform your community. And so with that, I left time for questions because I'm want to make sure that I'm addressing the things that are on your mind when it comes to volunteers. And I know that we're all screaming for volunteers, and the pandemic uh, really damaged the whole volunteer program. And so I know that people now are working very hard to try to get their volunteers to come back. I know that within the CCRCs, that's a great repository of volunteers, just figuring out how to tap into that. So any questions at this point, I would love um, to entertain.
Oops. I'm watching for the Q&A and the chat. Oops, we have one open question on the Q&A, and it is, if I could get her to open for me, I'm sorry. I'm having a technical problem here because it's not opening up my Q&A. Janet, it's not opening my Q&A. Can you? Oh, here we go. What is the title of your book? And it's a
Oh,
great book.
okay. Creating the volunteer force, rethinking the way we use volunteers in long-term care. Creating the volunteer force. And you can find that on Amazon, or my publisher is bookbaby.com. And so um, the hard copies are available at BookBaby.
And you now have another question, Paul. Have
Sure.
you seen instances of encouraging volunteers to leave another place and come to our community by way of food incentives?
Um, I can't say that I have, uh, but I imagine that there's an old saying, right? If you feed them, they'll come. So, uh, but I can't say that I have actually uh, uh, seen that happen.
But I have to tell you, knowing you, Paul, if there's a way you could make it work, you'd come
Oh
up with
yeah, I think, I mean, just brainstorming for a moment, I could just see having some sort of a meetup and having some snacks and things and gathering people around the table.
I think one of the things that has been so since I learned about you and the work that you're doing, so many communities, the whole volunteer responsibility falls on people who have so many other jobs, so many other things to do. Oftentimes, it's the life enrichment coordinator who has not been provided any training or any assistance in how to build or support volunteers, and yet they're responsible for it. And so, when not done well, it can just be a burden for everyone. And certainly we can have some outcomes that are not what we're looking for. And I think the beauty to the work that Paul has done, and it is so much based on your personal experience, not just on a theory,
Hmm.
but on something that you've truly lived and seen, is that done well, those volunteers really can have such an incredible impact, not only on the individual resident that they are there to support and be a partner to, but in what they're able to show the rest of the team that there are
Right,
non-traditional ways to help the whole team out.
right.
The companion volunteer is certainly one.
One of the things that I like to address with the people that are managing volunteers in long-term care settings, and many times it's just as an add-on to their already packed job description, is that you don't have to do this all in a week. If you just set aside a little time each week to work on it and build it over the period of, several months, you will have a strong program, or at least the foundation for a strong program. You don't want to rush this. You want to make sure that you have good feedback from the community, all the stakeholders, as I mentioned, and then you want to make sure that your onboarding process is well thought out and that your training program really prepares that volunteer for their role. And so it goes beyond just the 10-minute HIPAA video and resident rights and here's the lunchroom and so on, but really diving deep into um, the life of the person that's living in the nursing home or in the long-term care community, what they might be experiencing, communication techniques for both people with verbal and nonverbal communication abilities, and then talking about things like dementia and what are the people experiencing. And I always stress the L Power phrase that people living with dementia are still experiencing life, but in a different way. And it's up to us to meet them where they are. And so really getting into those kinds of conversations. And then not just throwing them into the fire, but on those first few visits, having them maybe meet someone like at mealtime, lunch, or some sort of activity where they can kind of get to know each other and so on. But anyway, the idea is that to me, then once you have that piece, that onboarding process, it really feeds uh, the sustainability of the program because people will feel adequately prepared and for that role. So I'm going to start preaching here.
There you go. We know you do. That's good, though. It's good preaching. Paul, a couple other questions we'll try to get to quickly. Our companion volunteers feel they are advocates for residents and are asking us to get permission from family members to also be involved in their medical care. Do you think this is necessary and a good idea?
Well, that's a thin line. But one of the things that we say in our training is for the companion volunteer is you are not an ombudsman. You're not going in there to survey the staff. Instead, you're going in to befriend residents and the staff, and so that you are part of the team. And so you don't want to set yourself up in an adversarial role. However, a volunteer might suggest something to the family as far as maybe becoming more involved. I don't know. I've never really had that experience. Generally speaking, it's the family coming to me saying, "Hey, we need someone to visit my loved one." So I
I
don't
think
think
from,
that.
yeah.
I think it's about training.
Yeah. And I think I mean, I think we've talked about some of these type things at board meetings when we've talked about what is the scope of the volunteer training and the accountability. And I think we do have to be careful that we're looking at regulatory compliance and HIPAA, whether it be HIPAA or what other, and we don't cross over into areas that we should not be crossing over into. That this
Right.
volunteer is not meant to be a part of the
Right.
clinical team.
No.
Um, so
The only thing that we do talk about is if they become really close to the person, such as Bill and Maury. I mean, they were like really best buds. And so Bill was put on a need to know list. And so he had to fill out a HIPAA release form, and the family agreed to it. And so he was privy to things that were going on. But it was in a benign way. It wasn't that Bill was criticizing or, you know, admonishing the staff or anything like that.
but I think those would also need to be community decisions and conversations
Right.
Yeah. Here's another question for you. Have you seen differences in the regulatory requirements for volunteer screening in different states?
And the answer is yes. And yeah, so you have to be aware of, I think most for this particular role, for example, if somebody's coming in to call bingo, you probably won't need a background check. But if they're coming in to do one-on-one visits, background checks are likely required. And some states require TB, proof of TB vaccinations. I even had one person was fingerprinted. She was volunteering in a long-term care setting that was part of a hospital, and so she had to get FBI fingerprints. So it really does vary, and that's probably the hardest part of this is getting and stepping that volunteer through that onboarding process. And again, it's really being with them and saying, "Here's the process. I'm going to be here with you through this process. We'll get through this together." And not just dumping 6 or 7 things on them that they have to do, but really walking with them through that process. But yes, you have to be familiar with your state's requirements.
Let me ask you one other quick question, and then there's a few things we want to share, and then we can stay on to answer a few other questions if people would like. But here's a quick one, Paul. You mentioned 4 organizations, Better Impact, AccuShield. What were the other two?
Oh, better impact. I'm trying to think what else. Uh, oh, VSIS in Canada. VOOM, VOME. That's a new one that we just discovered. AccuShield, I think, is also, I've talked to them about collecting volunteer data. And so they have a love meter now. And so when the volunteer finishes the visit, then I think there's some questions that they answer, and it kind of determines or reveals how that visit went and what the uh, affect of the resident was when they left.
Thank you,
So,
Paul. Well,
yeah,
I'll come right back to you in just a second. If Janet, you can pop up our final slide so that we get the business done. And then if there's a few other things that Paul would stay on and answer, and if you're still here, that
sure.
would be great. So Janet, if you have the slides
Are
there,
you, you're not seeing it?
oh, maybe I am. I am. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Here we go. Okay. I apologize for that. First off, the continuing education. Janet will pop a link in the chat with the post-session evaluation. Be sure you fill that out and provide your information as needed, your nursing home administrator hour, your NAB number, if you have that, and the CEs out for nursing home administrators. We want to invite you. This is part of the 2025 conference. It's a very special part of the conference, a small house summit. So it's a little different from the traditional site visits that we have always done as part of the conference. It's a chance to really learn and understand more about small houses because we know the future is moving. We hope the future is moving away from the institutions that we've always known. So check that out. It's a part of the 2025 conference, which is coming up in just 3 weeks, August 11th through 14th in St. Louis, Missouri. You can use the QR code or Janet put in a link. Check it out. We would still love to have you there. There is a virtual option for the conference. So much as we would love to have you there in person, if that's not a reality for you for whatever reason, please check out the virtual event because we will have not all the sessions will be available to you, but a great selection of sessions, including most of our keynotes. So I think you would enjoy being a part of that. So be sure to let us know. And then flipping back to the next one. If you've not participated or had a chance to listen to one of the Elevate Elder Care podcasts presented by CFI, they are wonderful, great speakers, leaders in our movement. So please check it out, and you can go to the website to learn all about those. And that being said, I want to, before anybody else pops off, formally thank you, Paul, for being here and for being a part of this. If you are coming to the conference, Paul, or either virtually or live, you'll be able to do some reaching out to Paul through the conference app because he's on there and he's number one on our leaderboard. So he's out there and anxious to talk to people and share what he knows, including a little bit more. Someone asked a little bit more. Could you tell us a little bit more about NALTCV?
Okay. Well, uh, I formed years and years ago when I first started, I formed an organization called Community 360. And that operated up until 2019. And through a series of circumstances, I wound up moving to Philadelphia. And then I thought that the smaller organization is something that I want to take across the country. So I formed the National Association of Long-Term Care Volunteers. And our role is twofold, well, maybe threefold, actually. First of all, we want to provide some sort of standardized training for companion volunteers so that they can come, go through our course, and is a very small subscription fee, $35. But the idea is we want to have them to have a little skin in the game. So we don't want people just jumping in and out of our training. And then we also want to come alongside that person that's managing the volunteers. So we have resources, we have training for them. And then there's a subscription their community can subscribe. And then they have access to our training, all of the resources, and their volunteers can go through the training. And so that's probably the main thrust. And then we want to, of course, advocate for volunteers as an essential, not a nice to have. And then we also want to conduct research to show volunteer impact. And so right now we're focused on um, research that connects volunteer impact and quality measures. So those are the things that we're doing right now. And we have podcasts, we have webinars, and all sorts of things. So if you go to our website, naltcv.org, you can check out everything that we have. And always feel free to reach out to me too. I'm happy to answer questions and offer my advice.
And we have some folks that are still on. Charles is still on, and he asked the question, how do you overcome the perception of formal commitments and reporting visits?
Um, well, we do that right in the screening process. And so right up front, we make clear that what we expect from the companion volunteer. And so, yes, there's going to be a fair number of people that don't want to make that heavy of a commitment. But historically, our attrition rate at that point is about 60%. But the people that get through the program, that 40% are diamonds. And I have volunteers that have been volunteering with us now for over 20 years. And it's just amazing to learn about that. And one of the fun questions I get is if they move to another city, they want to know if they can keep volunteering. And it's, yes, let me help you find a nursing home in your new town. So there's a high attrition rate right up front. So we make it very clear that the role that we're talking about requires a strong level of commitment because building relationships are not going to happen 10 minutes here and 2 weeks later and then, and that sort of thing. So we require them initially 2 to 4 hours a week for 13 weeks. That's what we talk about.
And Rebella, I see that you are still on, and you asked the question. I just lost it here. I'm so sorry, Rebella. I was trying to see if Janet had said something I needed to look at. You asked the question, when will volunteer recruitment expand to include larger community members, i.e. churches?
Oh, that's a great resource. In fact, I had a church adopt a nursing home. In fact, the activities director called me. She goes, "Hey, you got too many people coming over here." So I had to call the pastor and say, "Okay, you need to dial it back a little bit." But no, that's a great resource as well. So, in fact, I was invited by one church to teach Sunday school classes, and I did that for several months. And so we had a Sunday school class on volunteering in long-term care. And so yes, that's a great resource.
I have a vision of taking it to my local Y. So
Yeah.
you never know where you can take it. One last question, and then we'll probably need to move on. And that is Michael asked a question, must be on the website because he asked a question, what does the $35 monthly cover?
Well, it allows the person to access our training and resources that we have. And again, the $35 isn't to fund the organization. It's to check your level of commitment. And so we want you to have a little skin in the game. And but when you subscribe, then you have access to our training, you have access to resources that we have, and so on.
Well, I think that we're going to make that our last question. Thank you all who stayed on to listen to the questions. Great questions asked. Paul, wonderful information. I did pop in NALTCV's website on the chat, and we'll be sure that that's also included in the information we send out afterwards. You will get a copy, a link to this webinar itself. You'll also get a link to the handouts, which are already on the conference agenda that you can find on CFI's website. And we would love to see some of you in St. Louis. We would love to see you grow and build your volunteer programs. And as Paul said, reach out to him. He means that. He is there for anyone who needs anything. And you can certainly get his information. If you lose it, you can get it from the team at CFI. So I thank you very much. And Paul, have a wonderful day. And everyone, have a great day. And we will see you at some future educational offering.
All right. Thank you, Joan.
Bye bye.